In the middle of World War II, when oceans were crowded with convoys, battleships, and carriers, one American ship moved through the war as a ghost. It sailed under strict radio silence. Its logs were altered. Its name was deliberately excluded from official reports. On paper, it simply did not exist. Even among the U.S. Navy, knowledge of the ship was compartmentalized. Dock workers were told it was a routine auxiliary vessel. Escort captains were given false destinations. The crew themselves knew only fragments of the truth. They signed documents that threatened court-martial or prison if they spoke of what they saw. Letters home were censored down to nothing more than weather and vague reassurances. The ship's real mission was known to only a handful of officers in Washington. The reason was simple. What this ship carried, and what it was capable of doing, was more valuable than any battleship afloat. Unlike combat vessels designed to be seen, this ship was built to remain invisible. It avoided naval engagements at all costs. If enemy aircraft appeared, it did not fight, it vanished. Its survival depended not on armor or guns, but on secrecy. If captured, the consequences would have been catastrophic. Intelligence assessments warned that even partial enemy access could compromise entire theaters of the war. To protect that secrecy, the Navy went to extreme lengths. The ship's hull number was changed more than once. This paperwork listed contradictory missions. In some ports, local commanders were ordered to provide fuel and supplies without asking questions. In others, the ship never docked at all, receiving everything at sea under cover of darkness. There were standing orders prepared in advance. If capture was imminent, the crew was to destroy critical equipment and scuttle the ship, not to save lives, but to protect information. Sailors later recalled the psychological weight of serving aboard a vessel that could not be acknowledged. There were no medals, no headlines, no victory announcements. When other ships returned from battle to cheering crowds, this one slipped back into harbor at night, unloaded quietly, and disappeared again. After the war, when historians began piecing together the naval story of World War II, they found gaps. Missing references, redacted reports, operations that seemed to rely on information that came from nowhere. The ship had done its job perfectly. It left almost no trace. It would take decades before fragments of its story emerged through declassified files and personal accounts. By then, many of the men who served aboard it were gone, having lived their entire lives unable to explain where they had been or what they had done. The ship that officially didn't exist had helped shape the outcome of the war, precisely because no one knew it was there. And that was the point. The ship was not built in a famous naval yard under flashing cameras or patriotic speeches. There was no public launch ceremony, no newspaper coverage, no mention in naval bulletins. Its construction began quietly, hidden behind routine paperwork and deliberately misleading project names. To the outside world, it was just another technical vessel. In reality, it was something entirely different. From the beginning, secrecy shaped every decision. The design team worked in isolation, separated even from other naval engineers. Blueprints were divided into sections so no single person could understand the full purpose of the ship. Components were labeled incorrectly. Critical systems were assembled behind locked doors, accessible only to cleared personnel. Workers were told not what the ship would do, but only what their specific task required. The ship's outward appearance was intentionally unremarkable. It lacked the imposing lines of a warship. No heavy armor, no visible weapons. This was not a vessel meant to fight. It was meant to survive by remaining unnoticed. Yet beneath the plain steel hull was technology unlike anything else afloat at the time. Its internal spaces were packed with sensitive equipment, power systems, and specialized rooms designed for a mission so secret that even the Navy struggled to define it clearly in writing. Engineers had to solve problems that had never existed before. Electrical systems were redesigned to handle enormous loads. Cooling systems were modified to prevent overheating under continuous operation. Redundancy was built into every critical component, because failure at sea was not an option. Noise discipline became a design priority. Machinery was mounted to reduce vibration. Compartments were insulated not for comfort, but to prevent detection. Even the layout of passageways was adjusted to minimize sound traveling through the hull. Silence was a form of armor. Time pressure added another layer of difficulty. The war was moving fast and intelligence needs changed constantly. Engineers were forced to adapt designs mid-construction, often without fully understanding how the ship would be used operationally. Each modification increased the risk, but secrecy left no room for testing under realistic conditions. When the ship finally entered the water, only a small group watched. No flags, no band, no speeches. Officially, it was listed as complete. Unofficially, its true mission had only just begun. Final systems were installed after launch, away from prying eyes, sometimes while the ship was already underway. Crew selection was just as careful as construction. Sailors were chosen not only for technical skill, but for reliability and discretion. They were trained to operate equipment they were never allowed to discuss, even among themselves. Questions were discouraged. Curiosity was dangerous. What emerged from that silent shipyard was not just a vessel, but a tool designed to operate in the shadows of a global war. It carried no visible power, yet its influence would reach across oceans and battlefronts. Built in silence, engineered for secrecy, it represented a new kind of weapon, one that depended not on firepower, but on remaining unseen. And for years, it succeeded. When the ship finally went to sea, it did so without recognition. There were no official announcements, no recorded departure time, and no clear destination listed in naval logs. On paper, its movements were routine. In reality, every voyage carried a mission that could not be acknowledged, even after success. The ship rarely sailed alone, yet it was never part of a formation. It moved on the edges of naval operations, close enough to gather what it needed, distant enough to remain invisible. Its crew learned quickly that silence was not just a rule, but a survival skill. Radios were used sparingly. Lights were kept low. Even on open water, the ship behaved as if someone was always watching. Its missions began long before contact with the enemy. Positioning was everything. The ship had to be close enough to the action to observe, intercept, or record, yet far enough away to avoid attention. Hours were spent holding precise locations, sometimes in rough seas, while technicians below decks monitored equipment that few people on Earth even knew existed. The work was relentless. Unlike combat ships, there were no bursts of action followed by rest. Operations ran continuously, shifts blurred together. Crew members learned to measure time not by days, but by equipment cycles and system checks. Fatigue was constant, but mistakes were unacceptable. There were moments of extreme tension. Enemy aircraft passed overhead without noticing the ship below. Submarines were suspected nearby, forcing the crew into complete radio silence for days. Once detected, the ship would have no way to explain its presence. There were no defensive weapons to rely on, only discretion and luck. Occasionally, the ship's mission placed it uncomfortably close to major naval battles. Explosions could be seen on the horizon. Smoke columns rose into the sky, yet the ship remained detached, forbidden from assisting or engaging. Its value lay not in what it could destroy, but in what it could collect and understand. Information gathered aboard was carefully recorded, encrypted, and transmitted only under strict conditions. Some data was never sent at all, stored instead for delivery by hand. Officers understood that a single intercepted message could expose not only the ship, but an entire hidden program. The crew could never speak about what they did. Not in letters home, not in casual conversation, not even among themselves beyond what was necessary. The burden of secrecy followed them everywhere. Even victories felt incomplete because there was no recognition, no confirmation that their efforts mattered. And yet they did matter. Quietly, invisibly, the ship shaped decisions far beyond its steel hull. Commanders planned operations with confidence they would never explain. Risks were calculated with knowledge whose source remained classified. Battles were influenced by a ship that officially did nothing at all. When missions ended, the ship slipped away as it had arrived, unnoticed. No records marked its success. No medals reflected its impact. Its greatest achievement was remaining in the shadows, where its true power lay. In a war defined by noise, fire, and destruction, this ship fought differently by never being seen. The true danger facing the ship was never enemy fire, it was discovery. Capture would not have meant defeat in the traditional sense. It would have meant revelation. And revelation, in this case, had the power to reshape the war itself. From the moment it left port, the ship carried knowledge that could not fall into enemy hands. Hidden behind ordinary steel walls were systems and capabilities that, if examined, could expose entire strategies, technologies, and vulnerabilities. Enemy intelligence services spent the war hunting for exactly this kind of prize. Something intact, something understandable, something stolen rather than destroyed. The crew knew this better than anyone. Every briefing made the stakes clear. If boarding was imminent, there would be no negotiations, no surrender in the conventional sense. Protocols existed not for survival, but for denial. Equipment could be destroyed within minutes. Documents would be burned, flooded, or locked away forever beneath the sea. The fear was not hypothetical. Enemy naval patrols grew more aggressive as the war progressed. Shipping lanes tightened. Neutral waters became dangerous. On more than one occasion, unidentified vessels altered course toward the ship, forcing last-minute evasive maneuvers. Each encounter raised the same unspoken question. What if this time, escape isn't possible? Had the ship been captured, the consequences would have extended far beyond a single crew. Engineers and analysts on the other side would have dismantled its systems piece by piece. Patterns would be studied, capabilities reverse-engineered, assumptions shattered. Entire operational doctrines could have been rewritten based on what they learned. More dangerously, the enemy would have known that they were being watched. Tactics would change overnight. Deception would replace routine. Information pipelines would dry up. Years of silent advantage could vanish in weeks. Some historians later argued that possession of the ship might have accelerated countermeasures that took years to develop. Convoys could have been rerouted. Codes altered faster. Critical operations might have faced greater resistance or failed entirely. The war's timeline itself could have shifted, even if the final outcome remained uncertain. The crew lived with this burden daily. They understood that their own survival ranked below the mission's secrecy. In private moments, some wondered whether they would have the courage to follow orders if the worst came. Others took comfort in routine, believing discipline would carry them through. Fortunately, the moment never arrived. The ship was never boarded. The secrets remained sealed until long after the war ended. But the danger it represented to both sides was real and constant. In wars, victory is often measured in territory taken or enemies destroyed. Yet sometimes the most decisive factor is what is never captured. This ship's greatest success was not what it did, but what it prevented by staying free, silent, and just beyond reach. Because if it had fallen into enemy hands, the war they all knew might have unfolded very differently. When the war ended, the ship did not sail into history with parades or public recognition. It vanished quietly, just as it had lived. Official records were sealed. Crew members were dispersed and sworn to silence. What they had seen and done was not to be discussed. Not with family, not with historians, not even with each other. In the years immediately after the war, the world was hungry for answers. Battles were analyzed, generals interviewed, weapons displayed in museums. Yet this ship was missing from the narrative. Its name appeared nowhere. When questions were asked, they were met with polite denials or careful redirections. According to the records, it simply had never mattered. The truth was more complicated and more dangerous. What the ship carried was still relevant long after the guns fell silent. The technologies aboard were not obsolete. The methods it used were not abandoned. In fact, they became the foundation for an entirely new era of conflict. One fought not with visible fleets, but with signals, data, and invisible advantage. Former crew members returned to civilian life, carrying memories they could not share. Some struggled with the silence more than the danger they had once faced. They would hear public debates about the war and know that a crucial piece was missing. But secrecy did not end with victory. In some ways, it tightened. Decades passed. The Cold War came and went. New threats replaced old enemies. Yet the files remained classified. Historians would later note that this was unusual. Most wartime secrets eventually surface, if only in fragments. This one did not. Not fully. Not officially. Only in the late 20th century did the first cracks appear. Declassified memos hinted at operations that made no sense on their own. Budget lines referenced equipment that had no public counterpart. Veterans began to speak carefully, choosing their words with precision, as if still afraid someone might be listening. When partial disclosures finally emerged, they surprised even experts. Capabilities thought to have developed decades later were already in use during the war. Decisions once attributed to luck or intuition suddenly appeared calculated, supported by information no one knew existed at the time. The ship's true role was slowly reconstructed from fragments. A sentence here, a technical note there, a first-hand account released just before its author died. Even then, the full picture remained incomplete. Some documents were never found. Others, it is believed, were destroyed deliberately. The reason became clear. Revealing everything would not only rewrite history, it would expose methods still in use, principles still relied upon. The secret stayed buried not out of embarrassment or fear of criticism, but because it continued to work. In the end, the ship achieved something few weapons ever do. It outlived the war, outlasted its enemies, and remained dangerous long after it was gone. Its greatest mission was not what it accomplished at sea, but what it kept hidden for generations. And that, perhaps, was its most lasting victory.